Welcome to Frankly, My Dear, the podcast that explores just how bananas things were in classic Hollywood. Classic Hollywood was wholesome, right? People talk about the films with such nostalgia and wish for those days back. But what I find more interesting is the seedy underbelly, the backstory, the movie trivia, the backdrop of those films and what went on behind the scenes. These were real people. They had their own stories. They soldiered on to create these films that you so love, and I appreciate even more now by knowing their lives and struggles. So join me as we uncover the mystery and peel back the velvet curtain of classic Hollywood to not just highlight the scandals, but the triumphs of these film giants. Welcome everyone to today's podcast. I am going to be talking about Carole Lombard and Clark Gable today. I have been in the research trenches about these two. I am working on two books. One of them is biographical fiction, which is as true to Carole Lombard's life as possible. It's called Planes and Promises. And then I'm also doing a paranormal romance called No Angel of His Own, and that is going to be based on the two of them as well. So I have been in the research trenches on this, so I wanted to talk a little bit about these two. They only did one film together called No Man of Her Own, and this was in 1932. So this was a good 4 years before they even started dating, and this is the only film they did together. When it started, Clark Gable was married, Carole Lombard was married to William Powell at the time, and relatively happily, so they didn't start anything. Clark Gable was notorious for having affairs with his leading ladies. This was his second wife that he was married to at this time, and both his first wife and his second wife were quite a bit older than him. Again, Carole Lombard was happily married to William Powell. They had done two movies together already called Ladies' Man and Man of the World, and they fell in love during that time. Married relatively quickly, also divorced relatively quickly, but at this point they were married. They ended up divorcing before the animosity could really get to them, it seems like, because after this, they remained friends. So she considered them best friends. They still hung out. They actually dated for a while after they got divorced, which is interesting. And then they just stayed friends. So it was an interesting time though, because after she and William Powell divorced is when she dated Russ Columbo, which I had an episode about as well. And he had, I think, a hard time with this because he had actually been dating somebody named Hannah, and he thought they were super in love, and she up and went married somebody else. So this could have contributed to his paranoia. Plus, Carole Lombard did just hang out with William Powell, so there was an issue with that, and Russ Columbo had some jealousy stuff going on. The rumor is that they were engaged when he died. I wonder what would have happened if she had married Russ Columbo. Would she have gotten together with Clark Gable at all? Maybe not. Would she have died in that plane crash? Maybe not. There are rumors that she rushed back because she was concerned about Clark Gable and Lana Turner. They were filming at the time Somewhere I'll Find You, and there were rumors that they were getting it on. So whether that's true or not, I'm not really sure. He was notorious for his affairs prior to her. I like to think that he was faithful, but I mean, we never really know. Anyway, the film they did together, it's kind of funny to me because on the Internet Movie Database, it says they didn't really get along. But when you watch the two of them together, even though they weren't dating, they do have a great amount of chemistry. They do play off of each other very well, and they are very convincing. So this is a pre-code film, and it is about this man who's basically a card shark, more or less. He has his little group of people, and they cheat the system and the other players. He runs into her. She is a librarian. He goes over to the library because now he is intrigued by her. So he goes over there, and then they have some flirting in the library, and she kind of tried to play hard to get and all of that kind of jazz. And then before the end of the library scene, she says, "See you in church." So then the very next scene is him showing up at church, and going and sitting next to her with her family there. And then he gets invited over for ice cream and cake after church. And then her mom or her brother or both let it slip that she's going up to this lake. So he shows up there, and then we get some interesting pre-code. Basically, Carole Lombard's in her underwear. It is a little bit longer. It's not like the regular underwear that you think of. It's more like a boy short kind of thing, but it's silky. So she's running around in her underwear, and he shows up, and then she does put like PJs on. And then they have this really interesting scene that eerily parallels her death later. So they decide to make a bet on the flip of a coin, and if she wins, they get married. So she wins, and they get married. And then they're on the train, and he's taking her home, basically, back to, I believe, New York. And he hides a deck of cards or certain cards in the card table to cheat. So she sees him do this. She flips out the cards, and then he ends up losing a whole bunch of money. So after this, he gets really mad, decides that they shouldn't be together. It's this whole thing. He decides all this, and then he has a change of heart. There's a cop watching him, trying to catch him, wants to put him in jail. And so he tells her that he's leaving, that he's going to go to South America. He is going to figure out what's going to happen, but he still wants to be with her. Originally, he says that they shouldn't be together, but then he changes his mind because he does love her. So he sends her home under the guise that he's going to South America, when really he turns himself in. So he goes to jail, and there's this whole ruse about wiring her on a schedule to make sure she knows what's happening with him while he is in South America, which he isn't. So then when he comes back, spoiler of the ending, she figures this out because his old flame comes over and talks to her and tells her that he was in jail. And so she knows when he returns, he's putting on this whole big show about, I got you all this stuff from South America, check this out. And she knows, but she lets him continue on. And right before that, we find out she's pregnant too, which she doesn't get a chance to tell him. It just kind of cuts off with her deciding to play into this, that he was in South America. But I think she's trying to let him save face, maybe. So that part of it is interesting. There are a couple of other pre-code things in here, in that both Clark Gable and Carole Lombard are shown in the shower, and the other one opens the door and talks to them while they're in the shower. Basically, you see, with Carole Lombard, you see her back, and with Clark Gable, I think he spins, so like you see his back and his chest. So that is something that they didn't do after the production code went in. All of those scenes are interesting to see from that perspective. And as I said, I find this a really interesting movie to see just how they play off of each other and how their chemistry here is really good, even though they weren't together. I don't necessarily believe the Internet Movie Database thing about how that they didn't get along, because they really did seem to get along. I don't think they were indifferent to each other. But this is actually where the whole gag gift thing starts, which became a tradition for them. When production wrapped up, and this could have just been a promotionary tactic too, she gave him a ham with his face on it, because yeah, he's kind of a ham. So they took a picture of that, and that was probably all to drum up the movie, perhaps. He also gave her a pair of ballet slippers that said "To a True Prima Donna," so they were kind of doing this play on each other with gag stuff, and that started the whole tradition, right? So whenever they were away from each other, they would get each other silly gifts, and that's something that's a really cute thing, I think, and it's interesting that it started here before any of that, because it wasn't until another 4 years later that they reconnected. At the time, she wasn't in a serious relationship anymore. Russ Columbo had been gone for a while, and she was throwing this Mayfair ball, and all the women were supposed to wear white. Norma Shearer showed up in red. She got real mad, stormed out. Clark Gable apparently followed her. Shared a ride home, or to his hotel, because even though he was still married at the time, they weren't really married. They weren't living together. He was living in a hotel. So he invited her up, and she quipped, "Who do you think you are, Clark Gable?" So that's where the flirtation started, and it just expanded from there. Again, this is an interesting study. It's too bad that we didn't get to see them work together again, and if that would have changed, if the chemistry would have been different, if it would have been more intense. As I said, I really thought it worked really well here. Like, they seemed to interact really well. So that was an interesting thing. There are a couple other interesting tidbits about this movie. Originally, Bing Crosby was supposed to be in it. Carole Lombard did do a film with him called We're Not Dressing, which was after this, but they could have worked together earlier. The issue was that Marion Davies wanted Bing Crosby so badly to do Going Hollywood, so Paramount swapped him for Clark Gable, so Clark probably wouldn't have done this otherwise. That would have been interesting. And then Miriam Hopkins was actually supposed to be in this film originally as well, but she did not like the idea that she was going to be billed second. She was going to be billed under Clark Gable, and that really rustled her feathers. She really was irritated about that. She did have a reputation for being difficult, and I guess the question is, was she just being difficult, or was she just trying to gain a foothold in the industry? Maybe it was a little bit of both. So she refused. She left the film, and that cleared the way for Carole Lombard. If Miriam Hopkins had swallowed her pride, been in this movie, how would that have changed their lives? Would that have affected Carole and Clark getting together later? Would they have reconnected? Would they have even really known each other? So there are a lot of questions with how differently things could have played out here. There is one other thing. So this film was based on a book called No Bed of Her Own. Even though it was pre-code, maybe, I don't know if they would have ever kept that title, because that is a little bit more scandalous than the title they ended up going with. So during the production code, things were quite a bit tamer. I wonder if they could have gotten away with that title, but they decided to change it. You can find out more about the film and dynamics in my upcoming novel. I do have stuff about the Mayfair Ball and this film in there. Just keep in mind, it is biographical fiction. It is not a biography, but I want to show as true to her life as I can, but it is fiction. I write it in first person. If you do enjoy paranormal romance, I am working on a book called No Angel of His Own. So it's a play off of this movie. In those, I use inspiration from the films they were in together and sort of create their happy ending. The first book in this series is called Fang Me Tender, which gives Elvis his happy ending. I used the backdrop of Viva Las Vegas, but again, changed everything. So it's an entirely alternative reality, but based on those films that these couples did together. And really my intent is to give them the happy ending, because a lot of the couples that I focus on either didn't end up together, or people died too early, or sometimes both, as in the case with Elvis and with Carole Lombard. That was a little bit about that film, and I hope you guys have a great week. I will be back with a St. Patrick's Day episode next. So thank you very much for listening, and see you soon.